This is one of the top web vulnerabilities in 2025, and honestly, don't take my word for it. Let's just look at what Rapid7, the company that owns Metasploit, had to say recently. They were talking about in the recent Metasploit wrap-up that, out of the 4 modules that they added, 2 of them involved insecure deserialization. And it proves that this exploit primitive is still going strong. I remember back in 2016 when I was learning web security, they were talking about insecure deserialization, especially with programming languages like Java. It's especially notorious because it's very difficult to avoid as the programmer. There's a lot of ways that you can introduce that vulnerability if you don't handle things properly. But even with these modules here, we can see that out of the 2, one of them is Java on the Tomcat web server. Probably a lot of you guys familiar with that. But also on the Sitecore thing here, this was one in the .NET framework as well. So you can see that there are, this is affecting multiple programming languages. In this video, I'm actually going to show you how to interface with it in Python. And also, if you're interested in learning web security as a way to stand out and land your first job in cybersecurity, I want to let you know that I'm running a workshop called the Web Pentest Workshop, where we're looking at web security, how we can attack and secure a web environment, teaching you all the fundamentals from the ground up. This is not just some pre-recorded course with 12 modules that you go off and do on your own. This is a full-on live training and mentorship where I'm going to be in the weeds teaching you guys live on these calls and also answering any questions that you have as well, giving you access to a comprehensive lab environment, and at the end, ensuring that you can take all your coursework and market it on your resume, your LinkedIn, and all of that in the best way to help you land that next opportunity. So if that sounds of interest to you, check the link down in the description below. However, enrollment is time limited since it is a live course after all, so don't hesitate, click down in the link in the description below. Now, first of all, let's take a step back here and understand, just briefly, I won't bore you too much with the details, but what is insecure deserialization? What is deserialization to begin with? Well, basically, all you're doing with deserialization is you are taking data from one tech stack and allowing you to use it in another. So if you think about a modern environment, there's probably multiple tech stacks that you're dealing with. You might have a web server running Java, and then a database server, and then maybe you have another application that's running Python, and you might have a need for taking data from one of these, one of the tech stacks, and utilizing it in another one. Well, because they're all on different programming languages and different tech stacks, there's not an easy way to do that outside of using other file formats. Well, to take an object in a programming language and make it usable as an object in another one, we're going to have to deserialize and serialize data. So that is essentially what you were doing here. Now, you can also transport this in JSON and XML and text formats, but with serialized objects, these are a binary format. So you can see we take an object in a programming language and we serialize it into a binary format here. And then we give it to another tech stack. Maybe let's say the website's running Java. It's going to then deserialize that data from the binary format into a object format that Java can actually utilize in that example. So if we look down here, here's another way to look at it. Let's say we have Python application over here and then a Java web server over here. Well, we need to transfer that data from the Python application to the Java application. What we would do is take that object and we will serialize it into a stream of bytes. From there, we can maybe write it to a file, store it in a database, or maybe just have it running in memory. And we can grab those stream of bytes, whether it's from any of these sources, and we can deserialize that into a Java object in this example. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong here. I'll leave this link in the description if you guys want to read up on the full details of it, but I'm going to be demoing insecure deserialization. What can happen if we don't properly secure this? So in order to do that, I have a lab environment that I prepared, and all I have here is one file called deserialize.py. And maybe I'll take a look at this in a code editor here, and we can see that this is using a couple modules in Python, the OS module and the pickle module. The pickle module is what Python uses for serialization and deserialization. So I have one function here, and I aptly named it insecure deserialization, because we are just reading some file called demo.pickle, and we are doing a pickle.load. Well, if you guys have never seen that, you might be wondering, what is that? So let's take a look. If I go here we can see this is the documentation for Pickle. Pickle is the Python object serialization, a module that implements binary protocols for serializing and deserializing a Python object structure. So that was basically what I was showing you with serialization and deserialization. With this, we call it pickling and unpickling. That's just the terminology there. Now, read the big red warning here, right? Pickle module is not secure. Only unpickle data you trust. This is where so many people get it wrong in deserialization, okay? A lot of people, and this is a common interview question, by the way. This is how they'll try to see, does this candidate know what insecure deserialization is? I've asked this on interviews as well. Is they'll ask, okay, how can you prevent this vulnerability? And a lot of people, if you know what the cookie cutter answer is on a lot of web vulnerabilities, you're probably going to say, oh, well, this looks like injection. So just sanitize the input. Make sure that you do input validation. This is actually not sufficient to, in most cases, to prevent this vulnerability. Actually, the real answer is only deserialize data that you trust. Do not deserialize user input or any user controllable parameter. And the reason for that is that oftentimes the deserialization will occur before the input validation occurs. So even if you have the input validation there, it's going to deserialize it first, and the malicious data, if there is any, is going to be executed regardless of input validation. And so that's really the main way that you prevent against this. You can also implement things like hashing to ensure that it's not been tampered with and stuff like that if you really have a need for this. But the main thing that we need to make note here is within Pickle, there is something called the reduce method. Dunder, reduce, dunder is how you would read this. And this is a special method that basically takes no arguments. And if I just summarize this, it will return a tuple, and essentially its responsibility is to help you customize how the deserialization happens. So what we can leverage with this as an attacker is we can actually have some malicious code in this reduce method, and then whenever we do a pickle.loads, we will actually get it to run our malicious code. So in order to actually exploit this, we need to create a malicious pickle file that when deserialized will run our custom code. And this will allow us to fully gain remote code execution on the target system. So this actually, to exploit this, it actually involves being able to write some code ourselves. So let's go ahead and do exactly that. I'm going to pop open a second window here, and I am going to create a file called serialize.py. And once again, we'll import a couple things here. Import OS, import pickle. And the first thing that I'm going to do, and this is a methodology that I would recommend for all of you guys, is instead of just rushing, trying to exploit the thing, let's try to see, can we use this normally and give it the expected input first and just make sure that everything is working and see how do things function when you use it in the normal case. I would highly recommend this. Also, common interview question. They might ask, hey, what do you do first in this scenario or in that scenario? You always want to tell them you interact with the application as intended first so you can get an understanding of how it's supposed to work, and then you try and break it afterwards, right? So in order to do that, I'm going to define a function that I'll just call serialize, and that's not going to take any parameters. Maybe we'll call it like serialize exploit, even though there's not going to be an exploit yet. We'll add the exploit part later. And we'll just give like a variable here. We'll call it name. And let's just give it some data, right? So we have a name field here. I'm going to give my name. So I'll just say Ryan. And then we'll give it position, let's say, and I'll just say pen tester. And that will be the data that we want to serialize. So now we will write the file. So remember the file needs to be named demo.pickle because that is what's specified in the deserialization. And we will say write binary because this is a binary file. And I'll define another variable here, and I'm going to say pickle.dump. And that is what you use. If we take a look at the documentation, we would see this, but that is what you call to actually serialize. So that will actually take the file data and serialize it, and we'll just return save code. So once we've done that, now we'll just give it like a main function. So we'll say that, hey, if we run this standalone, if name equals main, meaning that if we run this file standalone, this will be our main function here, and we will execute the serialize exploit. So with that being said, we will test that out and see if that works. So we'll say Python serialize. We'll see if it writes the file. Let's see if there's any data in that file. And we can take a look if we dump it, because it is a binary file. We can see that it contains our parameters here: name field Ryan, position field pen tester, and then some other binary data and stuff like that. So let's see, can we deserialize this? So if we run Python deserialize, we can see that it deserializes it just fine. This would be the normal intended way to interact with the functionality. Now, let's go ahead and see, can we actually exploit this? Let's keep it simple first with the exploitation side and not do anything too crazy. Maybe we will have it run a single command like who am I or something like that, right? So if we want to do that, let's go ahead and copy the serialize into, we'll call it exploit.py. And the tweak that we're going to make is we're going to add a class, and we'll just call it I'm vulnerable or something like that. And what we want to do here is we want to define that reduce method. So dunder reduce dunder, and it will take in self, and then we're going to return, we're going to do os.system to run a system command, and we'll say to run the who am I command. So say who am I in here, and this takes it as a tuple, and we don't need a second parameter because we don't have any arguments in this case. Again, we can see that through the documentation that I had pulled up earlier if you guys were unsure. Now, the only modification we need to make here is we need to do a pickle.dump. Instead of name, we won't be using all that. We'll keep it in. We could delete it. We won't be using it at all. We're going to instead call the I'm vulnerable here. So now let's go ahead and try running that. And that overwrote the new file. And if we just take a look, we can see now we have the system who am I command. And let's see what happens when it gets deserialized by the application. And we can see here that this looks like the output of our who am I command. And if I run who am I, we can confirm that here. So it looks like we have successfully obtained remote code execution. Now let's turn this into something more useful for us. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and copy over a reverse shell payload. I'm going to use hack tools to do that quickly on the fly. This is the IP address of my Kali machine, and we'll choose some port here. I'll just choose like quad 5, and we'll go with the make FIFA one. I know that should work on my Kali Linux. So now we can go back into the exploit, and instead of running who am I, we can run this command here. I'm just going to paste it in. And if I did everything correctly, we should be able to get a reverse shell off of this. So to do that, I'm going to close out here. I'm going to start my netcat listener on port quad 5. And let's go ahead and first serialize this by running it. That creates this. And then just to confirm, we can take a look at the file. We can see the contents in there. And now let's go ahead and have the application deserialize it for us. And now we have remote code execution as the Kali user, and we have successfully compromised this system. So this one is a very important one to understand. If you didn't understand it after watching it, go back and try and practice it for yourself. Read up on the article that I showed you. If you want some additional training with this stuff, actually, I am starting up on Sunday the Web Pentest Workshop, where we're going to be diving in depth with insecure deserialization on Java, which is the most popular programming language where you actually do see this vulnerability springing up. But even as we saw, you see it in .NET and stuff as well. But by far, traditionally, Java has been hit the hardest with these bugs. I mean, like I said, I've been seeing it since 2016. So if you want to get some further hands-on practice with that, as well as all of the common web vulnerabilities that you need to know, getting hands-on practice of exploiting it, securing it, everything like that, then absolutely check the link in the description below to go ahead and join. Like I said, we're going to be starting that on Sunday. So hope to see you guys there. And if you were unclear on how to secure against this, again, I want to reiterate that the way that you secure against it is that you never deserialize untrusted data. It's really that simple, because anytime you are taking user input, that can potentially be tampered with. That can be modified by the user, right? Even if it's an HTTP header, right? Like people think like, oh, this was, we had the drop down and it's taking it from the drop down on the website. Well, what happens if someone is using Burp Suite or someone's just manually sending the HTTP request, or maybe they're reading it in from a header? Well, you can modify the HTTP headers. So it really has to be data that is not user controllable in any way in order for you to truly be sure that you are secure against this potential vulnerability. So let me know, like I said, if you have any questions down in the section below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.